Hello and welcome back to Speed Demon Painting. Today we are taking a look at the Latin Alliance Order of Battle, which was updated on the 22nd of January in 2023. The Alliance were not exactly in the best spot in the game. It was quite difficult to win with them because they relied on quite a lot of fragile ships, although they were fast moving. But those ships also had quite an eclectic mix of weapons on them, making it quite hard to do that hard strike at the start of it. And this was very much fixed in this ORBAT, as we'll later see. As always, during an ORBAT deep dive, we start with the standard special rules that come with each faction, and there's quite a few of them for the Alliance. The first rule that they get is ablative flank armor. Quite a few of the ships have got this rule if they are being fired at by an opposing ship that is in one of the side arcs of the ship. Now remember, you have to count the lead weapon of an attack. That's the one that launches the attack, and if that one is in the flank armor, that's pretty much where this rule kicks in. And it's an ablative armor rule, which is different from what you can find in some different ORBATs, so this also gives a glimpse into the future of some of those ORBATs. It now affects a number of exploding hit results in the attack being targeted at the ship, up to its mass value. So, for instance, if you've got a ship with mass 2, you can affect up to 2 exploding hits. And those exploding hits do not result and do not generate an additional action dice. So your opponent doesn't get to roll an additional dice for those 2 ones. So it's sort of an obscured light version. However, it's still something that can stack with obscured as well if you want it. And, more important, it can still stack with shield generators. Because we'll later find out that shield generators and shroud no longer stack. This does, however. There is also one additional benefit to this new ablative armor rule, and that is that it works against any type of weapon that you're being targeted with, and not just gunnery and fusilier weapons like the previous version did. I mean, the previous version was extremely strong, but it either worked extremely well or it didn't work at all. This is sort of more of a middle ground, if you will, where it will give you some protection against quite a few attacks, barring of course those with piercing, rail, ramming or submerged qualities. But if I'm not mistaken, those also circumvented the ablative armor rule before as well. By far the most important rules change is now in the coordinated support rule. It used to be something that boosted your ADV and SDV if you had a bunch of ships bundled together for the Alliance, and it's been completely reworked. Now it affects your attacks pretty much. What does it say? Models using weapons in support of a single lead weapon in an attack may use this rule, so anything that uses their weapons as supports can use this. The model may support with any weapon rather than needing to match all the qualities. Weapons used in support this way have their own qualities simply ignored and increase the attack dice pool by the values indicated by their crippled support at that range. This pretty much means that your normal gun batteries and also the little torpedo turrets that you can sometimes find on the Alliance ships can actually support some of the bigger values regardless of the keywords and rules used with that weapon. So you just look at the crippled value, that is the major downside, but you can create a lot of big attack pools because it doesn't really matter what the qualities are anymore on your weapons. Now that means that there is still an upside to upgrading your ship to all include the same weapon type, so you can go for big attack bundles, but you no longer have to if you don't want to. You can just take the reduction in the number of dice and just roll with it as well. There's a few exceptions to this rule though. Ramming weapons cannot use this rule, otherwise you'd get some absurd ramming values if you're using this one. And if you've got weapons with the submerged quality, you still can't use the rule to support weapons against aerial units. So, for instance, those torpedo turrets that I've mentioned earlier, you can't stack those on top of another attack trying to aim at something in the sky, so that limitation is still there. Vice versa, if you have got something with the aerial quality, you can't use it to attack submerged units, so there is a bit of a caveat in that one as well. In practice, though, most of the French ships are renowned for having a bunch of small gun batteries on them, so it's not going to hamper you too much. The third major rule that the Alliance has is the For Valor effect. If you use a Valor card or a Valor effect, or if it's one that has been cancelled by abilities such as Fortune of War, you can still roll an action dice, and if you're lucky enough to get that exploding hit, you do not lose the card and instead return it to your hand, which can be invaluable because, well, currently in the game you do churn through these cards quite rapidly, and there's been more and more effects that you can use them on, and so these guys, the French mostly, can regenerate some of these cards. The main difference is that you do have to use it on a Valor effect that directly involves this unit, but that's only a small thing. If it's a generic one that just does something for your whole fleet, then can't be used. And you can only roll once per card, so there's no fishing until you get your card back. That's not allowed either. Next up, we have a small but important tweak to heavy firepower. It is now timed before declaring an initial target. That is important because you now declare that you intend to use your rule. You get to see if it comes through or not, if it is cancelled by your opponent, and only then have to choose your initial target with any of those weapons. That's important because that is the stage where you decide which weapon will be supporting as well, so you can be sure if your heavy firepower comes through before you actually start assigning your attacks as well, which is a great change because it was always a bit of a will he counter it, won't he counter it, will he be able to counter it as well, and you could possibly have a bit of bad targeting because of heavy firepower. That is no longer the case. The other two things that were already in the ORBAT and remained the same as before are the Malinois strike fighters. The Alliance has access to some above average strike fighters, both in a defensive role, because they can scramble up to 10 inch. Now, as a quick reminder, scramble means that if you want to do an interception roll and assist with the air defense value against the target, you can do so on any ship within 10 inch now. Whereas before it was within 5 inch, provided of course that the ship that has the friendly SRS that can scramble assigned to it doesn't have an attacker on targeting it as well. And another advantage that the Malinois strike fighters have is that they add the hazardous effect on top of the piercing quality to their attack runs. Again, it does not apply to any Frelon Levant bombers, which is a special new type of SRS token that we're seeing in the Alliance list coming up soon. The other thing is the reinforced waterline. Attacks with the submerged quality only gain a single hit from a heavy hit result rather than the usual 2 if they are attacking this model. Exploding hits, however, are just unaffected by the reinforced waterline. Attacks with the piercing quality ignore this rule. Now, as far as I can tell, the only thing that has the piercing rule and the submerged rule are actually SRS attacks that are making use of torpedo runs, and those will ignore the reinforced waterline. But let's be honest, those are, they're not very common in the game right now, so this is a very strong rule if you've got or if you're facing off against an opponent that has invested heavily in torpedo hunt to your submarines, for instance. Next up, we have the battle fleet selection. Now, as a quick reminder, when you build a force, you can choose multiple battle fleets to make up your force, and they all come with their own neat little things. There's a few limitations that are also sort of mentioned in the main rulebook. Like, you cannot have more than one of a specific unit, so you can't spam things. You have to include a flagship. If you want to have attached units, they have to be from within the same battle fleet. And you can only have one aerial unit and one submerged unit in your battle fleet. And this is excluding whatever your main flagship may be. There's a few battle fleet bonuses up for the French as well. We know Command Override, that allows you to cancel a result once per battle of a dice roll and then re-roll it. However, you may not use this rule if you've already used any other dice manipulations and re-rolls, etc. The one that is completely new for the Alliance is Saber Rattle. If I'm not mistaken, that one is associated with the Italians. And it says that once both sides have deployed, but before any Vanguard or Shadowhunter moves have been made, units in this battle fleet may be redeployed, provided that their new position is closer to an enemy unit than before this redeployment. So you can actually get a full redeploy as well. However, before any Vanguard or Shadowhunter moves are made. So it's not quite as strong as those two abilities, but it does mean that you can just change your positions quite well, which is a big one, because we'll see that there has been an important change to the French Levant flying fleet, who are able to come in through strategic reserves now. Allowing you to automatically come into from reserves without having to roll. And this Saber Rattle is going to be incredibly handy if you're using Italians to hold the fort until your Levant skimmer ships from the French arrive from reserve. This allows you to sort of redeploy them in such a way that your opponent can't just use their overwhelming firepower that they will have if you're using reserves to just obliterate the initial fleet. I think this is going to be a very strong and useful rule for the Italians. Strategic reserves, like I said and alluded to, it means that you do not have to roll for the reserves. You can always assume that you get a heavy hit as the result, meaning you cannot come in from the first turn automatically. Feel free to roll for it, however, should you get lucky with your exploding hit. I mean, you can still come in from reserves, but it won't be automatic, because from the second turn onwards, a heavy hit is always a result that will bring your fleet in from the flank. There's also Valorous Conduct, which was also fairly recently added to the game, and that means that one of the cards that you play during once per round, that is, not just per game, per battle fleet with this rule, a unit in this force may replace the initiative value of a card being used for a Valor effect with the initiative value of 50. So you can use a crappy card in your hand and still have it count as a 50 in terms of cancelling that card out, which is quite a useful ability. As for the fleets themselves that you can select, you can go for the generic Alliance faction battle fleet, where you will not get any bonus, unless of course this is the second battle fleet included in your force, then it will make the strategic reserves battle fleet bonus. And these battle fleets look identical to any faction battle fleet really. Your flagship has to have the Alliance trait, you have to at least include one surface unit, and then you can only include one of each type of other units, such as submerged or aerial units, but you may include up to 2 of them for skimming units, because, well, the French do have a lot of skimmers after all, so it does look slightly different, I suppose. Next up we have the French Frontline Battle Fleet. It comes with a new class that we've not seen yet, which is the Couronne class. If I'm not mistaken, that used to be a carrier for the French in the old game, but we'll see what this one is. It's not included in the list yet. You can also include the Oriflamme Heavy Battle Cruiser or the Magenta Cruiser as well to lead your French frontline battle fleet. You then have to include at least 1 surface unit, and you can include up to 1 submerged unit and up to 2 skimmer units as well, as long as they have the French unit. Another thing that you can do is spam Chevalier class or Écuyère class units if you want to, and the bonus you get for it is Command Override. The mercenary battle fleets available to the Alliance are the same as any other faction, and they don't have their own mercenaries themselves, so I'm not really going to go into it that much. The much more interesting one now is the new French Levant battle fleet. You have to have one flagship, of course, which can be either a Magenta class, which has been released, the Saint-Michel class, which is also released, that is the Mass 3 flyer, or the, up until this point, unreleased Vauban class ship, which is a skimmer that has a very high SRS capacity because it also can launch the Frelon bombers as well. It doesn't need or doesn't require any surface units and can just make use of at least one and then a further 3 skimming units on top of there as well. And should you want to, you can spam the Chasseur class or the Honneur Destroyer, which I don't think is released just yet. And you can include up to 1 submerged unit as well, as long as it has the French trait. And it gets the same bonus as the generic one, it gets that strategic reserves automatically. I think this one is going to be key in quite a lot of list building for French fleets, because yeah, coming in from reserves with a fairly fragile skimming section from the French is going to be quite important, because you can get that first strike on your opponent if you're using that. It does require you to leave one fleet on the surface to sort of take the brunt of the opposing firepower, and yeah, that really is the area where the Italians shine, so I can see this becoming a very often used battle fleet within an alliance fleet in general. And like I said, that French battle fleet, Levant battle fleet, will be paired quite often with the Italian frontline battle fleet, which can have the Mars class or the Mercury class. The Mercury class I don't think is in this ORBAT yet, but it will be. The Mars at least is, and that is a typical heavy battleship that can take quite a bit of punishment. You can then include 1 and up to 4 additional Italian ships to go with it, where you can spam the Gladius class and Sistus class, I think those are frigates, if you want to as well, with up to 1 submerged unit having the Italian trait. The bonus that they get is the Saber Rattle that we've already discussed, that allows you to redeploy, and yeah, smart Commodores will use this rule to their advantage to avoid some incoming firepower whenever possible. The Italians are set to receive quite a few extra boxes though, because they also have a support battle fleet as an option as well, with the as yet unmentioned Apollo class or the Minerva class, which is a typical carrier, as you can sometimes see in other forces. They all have to have the Italian trait, and it has quite a bit of fewer numbers, because you have to include 2 surface units if you want to take this one, where you can have the multiple Pugio classes if you want to, and you can also take up to 2 submerged units, submarines, to go along with that as well. And then one final option that has been released, or rather has gone in pre-order last month, is the Sousa battle fleet. These are also tough as old boots ship, because they're old Union Civil War era ships, which are the Columbia class or the Virginia class, which were in that box, and the Salvador class is something that hasn't been released yet for them, so yeah, expect that to come in the future as well. You then have to take 1 surface unit, and you can expand that with up to 4 other units. Multiple Gettysburg and Springfield class ships can be included in that one as well, which are the main bulk of these Sousa battle fleets, where you can only have 1 submerged unit with the Sousa trait. I didn't see any, so this is perhaps a bit of future-proofing on that regard, and 1 flying unit with the Sousa trait, but again, I can't recall any being in this ORBAT yet, so that's where you can get them. The Sousa, again, old era ships, tough as old boots, will complement the very agile French quite nicely as well. Next up, we have the Alliance outfitting yards, and there's a few changes that shed some light on what we can expect to see in the future, and when those future videos drop, I'll be sure to make an update about them as well. So if you like this kind of content, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for any future updates. Now, the one thing that they have as a unique thing in the Alliance is the Rostratum Naval Ballista, which is a funky little one, because if you shoot with that one, you can resolve the attack as normal, and if the initial target suffers 1 or more points of damage, so you do have that thing that you have to do damage first, then you can make a Valor effect against the initial target, and as that Valor effect, the initial target receives a level of Disorder, which is already decent, but maybe not worth a Valor card. But that last bit sure is. It may be turned to any facing of the attacker's choosing, so you can just turn the ship around and, well, especially if you manage to do this against a flagship, those things tend to have a very limited turn limit if you can just flip them around. Again, this is a weapon found on the Italian battle fleet, so having that one to sort of disrupt your opponent's movement and to face them in awkward directions might just be the key to hold out longer until that French Levant battle fleet shows up to start hammering at the enemy at close range. Other than this naval ballista though, there have been a few changes to the Alliance generators. The first up is a minute buff to the atomic generator, which now also increases the turn limit by +2 on top of increasing the speed attribute by +2 as well. And it also, which is a downside to it, which has remained the same, you suffer an additional point of damage whenever it suffers a catastrophic explosion caused by receiving a duplicate reactor leak critical damage marker. However, the chances of that occurring are slightly minimal, and when it does, you'll be, well, good on you for remembering that small little addition as well. The Fury generator was unchanged, but the magnetic generator has gone to a new iteration as well, and it's a good one. It's a technology that will be available to every fleet, but what does it do now? Well, any heavy hits against the model with this generator by weapons with the aerial quality or by enemy SRS counts as hit. So this is a protection against all aerial quality weapons now, meaning that, well, the Chinese, for instance, are going to hate having to face someone with a lot of these, and to some extent the Union as well. Generic magnetic generators might just become the new hotness in the near future. Exploding hits are of course unaffected by this one, and this is another big one. Once per activation, this model may target either itself or a friendly or enemy unit within 10 inch. When you do, you roll an action dice for each SRS token in base contact with the targeted unit, and you roll separately for each stack. You remove one SRS token for each exploding hit result, meaning this generator can also be used as a sort of a custom flak barrage, if you will, where you can shoot down opposing SRS on top of the already great protection it provides the actual ship being equipped with it. Meaning, well, the need for flak barrage in every fleet has been reduced slightly because you can always bring in a few magnetic generators as well. However, there's one thing you have to keep in the back of your head. If the unit targeted is an aerial unit, it also receives a level of disorder on the closest model in the unit, meaning that protecting other aerial units in your own fleet is going to be difficult. Disrupting opposing ones is of course great, but yeah, you would then need to have an opposing aerial unit being defended by SRS. I haven't seen it occur all that often in our games, but you know, it might as well. The repulsion field generator was unchanged, so there's nothing to say about that one. The shield generator has got a small addendum, and actually a big one. A model cannot be obscured while using a shield generator against an attack. So in other words, the old days of stacking shroud and shield generators, well, that's pretty much gone because the shroud generator pretty much gives you obscured as well. It was one of the most obnoxious combos that you can get with shield generator ships. This has nothing to do with the Alliance, by the way, because they don't have these, but it was always a tough nut to crack for most players, and yeah, they listened to that and they are nerfing it. The French ORBAT is the Alliance ORBAT, I should say, is sort of the showing you what's to come for the rest of the armies as well. Mind you, though, it was specifically said on the Discord as well that you do not transfer these rules just yet to all the other factions. All the other factions just still have shield generators that operate as normal, so it'll just be a case of when those Orbats are updated. And knowing Warcradle, that usually doesn't take too long. The Solix generator finally is one that was unchanged, but is a crucial one for the Alliance because it gives the sustain quality to any heat lance set, or thermal bomb weapons used by this model. And as a valor effect, this generator may be used in the shooting phase with a 360-degree line of sight to make an attack against the initial target using the heat lance set profile weapon. This is going to be interesting because that means that you can still use that coordinated support value to have a free heat lancet weapon on there as well. So yeah, you can do some funky stuff now with heat lances, as we'll discuss next. When it comes to the Alliance weapons charge, not a lot has changed, but there is a thing that definitely is going to have an impact for every other nation soon as well. The big change was to the gun battery, and I've already outlined this in red. A small gun battery is now a 5.3 weapon in its perfect range, being closing range, and a 3.2 weapon in point blank. So the dice values for the humble old gun battery have been upped, and it has a consequence as well for those values in the support range at crippled value, because those are extra important for the Alliance battle fleet, because again, the red line, the crippled value, is what you look at for your coordinated support rule, because that's by how many dice you can increase any attack in that fleet as well. And yeah, the fun thing about it is we'll be using these gun batteries that have very little in terms of weapon qualities, only having gunnery, to support things such as the heat lance, giving you only 2 dice, let's be honest, but those 2 dice will have the hazardous and devastating quality as well, should you so desire. So you're going to have some incredibly fun combos with weapons that the Alliance is going to be able to pull off. Other than that, there hasn't been that many changes. Heavy prow rams and proud rams in general now have a lower ramming value if you use the crippled value. Again, this doesn't have any benefits though, because ramming weapons cannot use that coordinated assault rule that the French have, well, the Alliance has. There's also been a few changes to the heavy rocket battery that now have a 6.3 value in that crippled value, making it an even better weapon for supports. And yeah, that one is important for the French when they are using them. And the humble rocket battery itself, the smaller version, has also seen an increase in its crippled stats, becoming a more reliable 4.2 value there as well. For some reason, the 5.2 is in blue, meaning it's a value that has changed, but if my memory serves me correct, that's what it always has been, so I'm not quite sure why that one is blue. It might be a small little mistake. Other than that, it's good news for the Alliance. We're seeing a bit of an increase in the crippled stats that they have, which is great news for them. And double great news, because for some weapons, such as the gun battery, we see an increase in dice in their healthy stat, their battle ready stat as well, which is important because, as we'll see, they now have rules to prevent them from going into a crippled status as well. Up next, we have the flagships for the Alliance, and we're starting off with a fairly new entry, new as in the models have just gone on pre-order, and that is the Columbia Heavy Battleship, which clocks in at 275 points. Not a lot has changed for these guys, but it is a very useful addition to the Alliance fleet, because I described them earlier as being a tough as old boots ship, and if you look at these stats with armor 8, citadel 17 and a colossal 14 hull points to go in between them, between your battle ready stat and the crippled stat, you really have that very tough anchor point that can take a beating or two before your more nimble French arrive into the battle as well. And that could be one of those ships that you want to keep in the back of your head if you want to go for the old hammer and anvil approach. Next up we have the Magenta Levant battlecruiser. The points were changed slightly to 241 points as well. The weapon loadout with 2 heat lances is now a lot more interesting because it's being backed up with those gun batteries that we know have higher support values, and with the new coordinated support rules that we can find, this thing kicks quite a bit heavier, although its points cost was upped by a small amount. You can still go for the full heat lance weapon loadout. You don't have to per se, but you can swap out that rear heat lance for a Solex generator. Gotta remember that can still be used as a heat lancet at a pitch if you're using a Valor effect, and why wouldn't you? You've got 4 Valor, you might even get it back. It does, however, reduce the model cost by a healthy minus 20 points, so it's always something to keep in the back of your head. And also good news for the Alliance, the Levant Surge has been boosted. Now, attacks with the submerged quality only gain a single hit from a heavy hit result rather than the usual 2 when attacking this model. So there's an increased defense for these models. Baseline doesn't even have to activate the ability if they're being targeted by torpedoes. Exploding hits are of course unaffected by this rule, and all of the other good stuff that you had in the past, that you can make the Levant Surge gain +3 movement, stop being a skimming unit and become a full-blown aerial unit as well, can still be done. Just have to be remembering, or you have to keep in the back of your head, that you can't do this twice in succession. And let's be honest, if you do that, you have a flagship moving at a incredibly high 3-inch drift and a 9-inch speed. That's something that quite a few other nations' cruisers can't even manage. So you really do have a very speedy flagship when you get the Magenta, and you can bring it in from the flank as well to make the most from these heat lances because of how generous the Levant ship, rather the Levant battle fleet is. If you would rather not take any of the Sousa ships, you can always opt for the Italians to provide you with that very heavy anchor, the anvil for your fleet that has to hold out until the French arrive, and you can get a Mars heavy battleship. It's a super solid entry at 270 points and now gets the ablative flank armor rule as well. It doesn't quite have the raw defensive stats compared to the Citadel 17 that we could find on the Columbia ship, and does not quite have the 10 hull points in it as well, but ablative flank armor does make up quite a bit in this regard. And you have to remember, this one comes with the added advantage of having the advanced repair facilities rule, meaning it can help repair any damage that your opponent shoots at it. Remember, through this rule you can actually remove a bit of damage on a model as well if you're lucky enough to roll a critical hit, well, an exploding hit result rather, during a repair test. So this is another way that you can get that ultra durable ship in there that is just gonna have to weather the storm. The Italians also have the classical assault carrier in the Minerva class, which it clocks in at 255 points. It sees the changes to hull point distribution that we've seen with a lot of carriers across all factions, so that's nothing to be surprised by. It does come with an even better advanced repair facilities, giving it a whopping 6 dice to roll for repairs, meaning that if you're lucky, with 6 dice you can expect an exploding result leading to repairing an effective ship within 4 inch of that one. So yeah, it's an even better ship at repairing as well. And it does come with the new and improved ablative flank armor as well. Yeah, with the long range you can find on SRS tokens, this is perhaps a ship you consider as well. You can consider to hold the line because you don't really have to advance. The major downside to this one though is of course that if you're playing a mission where you have to get into the opposing field, and there's a few of those, that you'll be on the back foot slightly. Next up we have the Oriflamme Grand Battlecruiser, and I think this one has had one of the more interesting changes. It is now at 230 points. The main downside of the Battlecruiser was always that you were giving up quite a lot of the defensive stats, which was, yeah, it's not a battleship, let's be honest. So it's only at 7 armor and Citadel 14, and you're going to feel that, especially alongside with a lower than expected hull points in a battle-ready state. However, the big change to this one can be found here, the Protected Gun Crews. And what does it do? If this ship gets crippled, and it has this rule, it can use the battle-ready value of their weapons as long as they have the gunnery or broadside quality. This rule cannot be used if the model has the Chaos and Disarray disorder condition, so if you're completely panicked, it's not going to work, of course. And it has no effect on the supporting with the coordinated support rule. So you can't say like, oh, I'm supporting the weapons, and this rule says that I can use my battle-ready stats. No, that's not how it works. When using that as a support, you're still using the crippled results. However, that does mean that this ship can still continue kicking out a lot of damage even if it is crippled. And, well, you can expect to see slightly more damage intake because it is only the heavy battlecruiser with a slightly lower amount of armor and citadel as well. But it does mean that it will continue to put out punishing firepower even if it does go crippled. And in those late stages of the game, where you're quite often finding a crippled ship fighting against another crippled ship, especially with flagships, this might just be enough to come out on top. And yep, it's one that you could consider as well to put on in your anvil sort of setup when you've got something else in reserve. So the Oriflamme Grand Battlecruiser definitely gets a big thumbs up from me. I can't wait to experiment with this one. Speaking of which, I'm actually putting my money where my mouth is with this fleet, and I have ordered a massive Alliance fleet, mostly French for now. So yeah, expect to see a few more updates for about how that's going as well in the future. Next up we have the Saint-Michel Levant Battle Carrier, which clocks in at 248 points, which is slightly cheaper than it used to be. I think it's a reduction of 7 points there. The major downside it had was the lower SRS capacity, but the big reason to take this one is mostly because it has Fortunes of War as well. So you take this one to cancel the other effects, and that's why you quite often have a place for it in those lists. And it's actually something that I find it a tricky battleship to integrate into what I want to do though, because if you're arriving from reserves, you're not allowed to also launch your SRSs in that same turn, so it's a bit of an odd one. Ideally, this one can be found on the battle fleet as you start to play, and you wouldn't want to hang it in reserve. The only criticism I really had of this Orbat is that the Saint-Michel could only be included in a Levant battle fleet or a generic Alliance battle fleet, and in both of those cases the major benefit is that you can hold it in reserve, and yeah, that's not really what you want to do with this ship. You want to have it on the ground as well. It's not a biggie, but it's just, yeah, it's got a bit of an awkward positioning within the battle fleets, that's all. Next up, we have the Vauban Levant Sky Fortress, clocking in at 370 points. And what do you get for it? Well, you get something with a reasonable amount of toughness, with 9 hull points in Battle Ready and 9 in Crippled, but only 7 armor and 13 citadel, so it's not exactly going to duke it out in close range. In terms of armament, you do get something that has access to 2 front-facing heat lances, which is already a great start, 2 thermal cluster bombs that you can drop behind itself, although it's only at speed 4 when you do, and it's got 4 rocket batteries, of which 2 are forward-facing and 2 are side-facing, so ideally you want to target something in the side arc with this weapon. The weapons are not exactly the most enticing thing about this entry. It has SRS capacity, traditional SRS, of 4 and 3, meaning battle ready you can send out 4, in crippled you can send out 3, but it also sends out Frelon bombers, which are sort of the heavy hitting types of SRS tokens. The rules are as follows. Frelon bombers are SRS tokens that are launched with a range of only 30 inch. So you do have the range issue, but they do contribute 5 action dice to attack runs as opposed to the regular 3. They can actually be combined with other friendly SRS tokens in an attack run. A Frelon bomber SRS token is removed for every 2 successes in an interception, but you can only intercept them once all the other friendly SRS tokens have been intercepted. In other words, don't send those bombers out on their own to a target, because there's a good chance that they'll just be gunned down because 2 interception or 2 counters are enough to shoot one down anyway. Any attack run that has the majority of the tokens as Frelon bombers has these sustained bomb and hazardous qualities. I do think you'd want to avoid that though, because it would mean that you're losing out on that very good piercing rule that you get with regular SRS tokens. However, if you combine the normal SRS tokens with Frelon bombers in the attack run, and the number of those Frelon bombers is greater than the mass of the attack run target, the action dice pool gains the devastating quality, so you can create some pools that have both the piercing and devastating rule for, well, very devastating results. You do have to send out more bombers than the target has mass, so with this Vauban I would not be targeting anything that is mass 4 or higher, because then you would not be making the absolute most out of these bombers as well. It's best to stick with mass 3 weapons or lower than that. Frelon bombers cannot make an SRS recon flight, so you can't change them for cards, or SRS mine clearance, but they can use the combat air patrol rule. However, that means that you're only getting to, or you only get to launch 2 of them, and that's not exactly the best thing to do. That means that to get that devastating attack, you can only really target mass 1 ships. So if you can avoid it, try to avoid it. However, if you can't avoid it, of course, make use of the rule, because sending out something is better than sending out nothing. Other than that, the thing has the lumbering rules. Now, there's something odd about this one. Lumbering now says that all gunnery targeting this unit may reroll blank results of the action dice. That's as I remember it. This unit may make a full reverse special operation without receiving a level of disorder, exactly as I remember it, and any additional levels of disorder once at Chaos and Disarray are ignored for causing damage, and it doesn't suffer any disorders from collisions. The one thing that seems to be missing from this description though is the fact that lumbering ships only drift 3 inch rather than their mass result. Maybe that was completely changed because it was introduced to curtail a bit of the movement speed for things like the Ice Maidens, so maybe that's something we'll see disappearing in future updates as well. We'll see. In order to create a bit of extra defense, the Vauban also has a shield generator, which is nice. It can't be upgraded or replaced, however. All in all, I think this is going to be a very interesting ship to take in your fleet, and I can't wait until it is released. Next up we have the alternate build option from the new Columbia set, and that is the Virginia class assault battleship, which is part of the Sousa as well. It's again one of those tough as old boots. The main difference between this one and the Columbia is that the Columbia is a pure firepower ship, while this one is one that kicks in with a nice little bit of flak barrage to protect yourself against some SRS tokens, which is a great new thing. It does trade in some of its cannons for this Terminator Assault, where they're using these neat little gyro special tokens to launch attacks pretty much at targets up to 20 inch away. Now, you gotta remember though, this is a special operations action, so you have to launch this before the ships move. You get some extension in your range when it comes to being able to launch attacks, but it definitely isn't the same as just getting an extra whopping 16 inch on your attacks, because well, you still have to move as well, so well, it gives you an extra 9 inch in an assault compared to most other ships, which is by no means a bad thing. So again, great anvil unit, and you can get pretty aggressive in assaults as well with it. Next up, we have two new entries which are named variants of the Oriflamme class. The first one being the Fish at 245 points. It is mostly a gun battery equipped one that comes with the new focused gunnery rule. And I say new focused gunnery rule because it still receives +2 action dice to 1 dice pool, but it can now also reroll blank results, making it more effective than it once was. In addition to that, you get command codes on this named ship, allowing you to pretty much use a reset dice roll like you see with Command Override, just once every battle round, and to any friendly units within 15 inch of this model. Very strong little rule, especially if you're one of those who isn't exactly blessed with good luck. It can be quite worth checking this one out. You're only paying 15 points extra anyway, so yeah, it's not a bad thing. And on top of that, you also get Maritime Patrol, meaning it's even more efficient at hunting submarines, so yeah, can't fault it. I mean, for plus 15 points, you are getting quite a bit in return. The second named Oriflamme class ship is the Richelieu, clocking in at 251 points, and this is pretty much the one that you should get if you're a big fan of heat lances, because it changes all of the gun batteries to heat lance sets, and it changes the rear weapon for the Solex generator, allowing you to get sustained on all of those weapons, and it's pretty much built in. It also gets the additional benefit of Maritime Patrol, meaning it's more effective at hunting submarines, and focused gunnery on top of that, meaning you get sustained and reroll blanks on those weapons, and that can be extremely devastating with these heat lances, especially because, well, you're really fishing for critical hits with those, which is great news for it. You are foregoing the command codes with this one though, but you may more than make up for it in terms of offensive firepower, so this definitely sounds like one you want to try out. Next up, we have the surface units available to the Alliance, and we start off with the Auxilia fast cruiser, which is one of the Italian ships that are going to be coming in. And when they say fast cruiser, they mean it. The thing moves at a massive speed 9 and gets Vanguard on top of that. So some missions require you to get into your opponent's quarters, and yeah, this is the ship to do it. I mean, with a prow ram, being able to ram your opponent with gun batteries and heavy gun battery, it is going to be a fast mover that can just put the hurt onto your opponent incredibly fast, and at 92 points you're not paying too many points for it. With linear dash as well, this thing can kicking at a massive 13 inch. That's faster than some of the Mass 1 ships move in other armies, so yeah, well worth considering if you want a bit of speed in your Italian force. The Cestus Sebec is one of the Mass 1 ships available to the Italians as well, and an interesting one. I mean, you can have up to 60 in up to 6 in a unit. 60 would be mad, but they only clock in at 30 points each, and they have flag barrage 6, so you can get a unit that has a total flag barrage value of 12, which is no joke. They also come with gun batteries. We've seen at the start that the values of gun batteries have significantly gone up, and you combine this with focused gunnery, allowing all of those dice to be pulled together for an additional +2 action dice and reroll blanks. Yep, you're dealing with a very solid little Mass 1 ship. The only massive downside, before you get too excited, it's only one with 2 hull points, and it's a trend that we see returning in this army as well when we continue. Next up are 2 ships that I actually kind of want to talk about side by side, and that's the Charlemagne and the Chevalier cruiser. Both are in the French box set, and it's a bit of a choice on which one do you want as your midfield brawler. The Charlemagne heavy cruiser can definitely do it. I mean, it's been now upgraded with a heavy rolling broadside, so it can do a lot of damage. On top of that, broadsides might just become even more interesting with the new support values that you can add to them, because you can really max out that fusillade rule that they have. But it is slightly slower, and it doesn't really get all that much additional toughness with it as well. It does gain from the new protected gun crews, so you have to cripple it before it stops being scary. Sorry, you have to sink it, not just cripple it, before it stops being scary. So in that respect, it does soak a bit of firepower, because you can't just move on to the next target because of protected gun crews. However, in terms of toughness, it really is identical to the Chevalier cruiser, and of course the Chevalier being a pretty noticeable 23 points cheaper does make it a bit of a tough choice. I personally think I'll be going with Chevaliers myself, although the firepower will be significantly less if you're using the Chevalier compared to the Charlemagne. However, seeing as a lot of the firepower is going to come from those Levant ships that you can hold in reserve, I kind of want my my anvil units to be slightly more durable, and I think the Chevalier wins out in that respect. One thing that I have not discussed yet, but is worth discussing at this point, is the fact that the French lost a lot of rules, giving them a lot of additional SDV and ADV, but the Écuyère frigate makes up for this. It now gets the corvette duty, meaning it adds +1 to the defensive dice pool of any friendly units, or models rather, within 5 inch, and this is in addition to any other bonuses such as being part of an attached unit, but also just being within the same unit as well. And if they're clocking in at only 25 points per model, you can't really fault it. They do also only come with 2 hull points, which is their major downside, but with the new and improved gun battery and this corvette duty, and only being 25 points, I can see my lists including quite a lot of these Écuyère frigates, especially since I've found a new appreciation for them, with these missions requiring you to cross the board and the table, having these fast little zippy ships that can move up to 12 inch and can find themselves into the opposing territory in turn 2. That means that your opponent is going to have to respond to them, and with corvette duty, that's not always the easiest thing to do. The weapon platforms being used by the French are not noticeably different. Well, they're not being used by the French, they're technically Portuguese units as well. They are being manned, but they also come with this coordinated support rule, which can be pretty funky because they come with 2 gun batteries as well, and they do have a few options to change it to torpedo turrets for free should you so desire. So you can actually make a few of these with some torpedo turrets, change them out to rocket batteries as well, and well, you can just create some funky little things, because you can always take more of these platforms as well should you so desire, and they act as supply depots as well, along with useful freight, giving you additional victory and valor manipulation dice, and the heavy escort rule, and advanced repair facilities. I mean, it's quite a lot that you're getting for your 68 points. The only downside to them is it's not exactly the most amount of hull points and armor that you're getting for your points as well, and you always run the risk, of course, that if your opponent is able to assault and destroy them, that he gets a few victory points for it. But yeah, it's up to you if you want to weigh those benefits against the downsides. Next up we have the Gettysburg Heavy Monitor, which is also a perfectly viable option for a mid-range brawler, especially, you know, continuing on that theme of the Civil War era ships. With 5 hull points, it is above average durable, and it clocks in at 120 points. You do get some fun stuff with this one, and some interesting weapon options, like replacing the gun batteries for torpedo turrets, should you so desire, which can probably allow you to do a couple of fun things along with contra-rotation, which is a rule that you also find on quite a few other Union ships as well. So yeah, if you want a very durable mid-range midfield brawler, these will definitely fit the bill as well. The Gladius strike cruiser is sort of the main cruiser for the Italians, and they are tough. I mean, with Citadel 13 on top of Armor 6, you are getting an above average tough ship, which only is a 100 point ship. So, and it comes with 2 heavy gun batteries, one front facing, one aft facing, and a torpedo salvo, along with ablative flank armor, and with sharpshooter get to make some more out of those gunnery qualities weapons. And you mustn't forget, in this case you've got coordinated support, so you can stack your heavy gun battery and your torpedo salvo should you so desire. You can do some pretty nifty things as well. I mean, I'm really liking this entry. If I'm brutally honest, I'm liking this one slightly more than the Gettysburg, but of course it's a different nation, so you can expect to have a few different things in there. But yeah, the Gladius does stand out to me as being one of the stronger entries, just for the raw amount of stats you get for the points in this Orbat, so yeah, big thumbs up. The Jupiter support carrier is your traditional carrier. However, you do have to mention that it has an SRS capacity of 4 and 3, whereas quite a few other nations have to make do with something that has an SRS capacity of 4 and 2, which stacks not quite as nicely together. Comes with a prow ram and a torpedo salvo. That's a bit of a schizophrenic makeup. You don't want to be ramming things with support carriers. Let's just not be silly, but you can. If your opponent gets too close, I wouldn't strategize around ramming my opponent with it, but it's a neat little extra to have in case of these French and Italians, I should say. And at only 130 points, it's quite alright compared to other carriers. The Loire light cruiser is the entry for the French, where you have the single gun battery in the front and only a small gun battery in the aft facing ones, of course with 2 small torpedo turrets as you get with French cruisers. It's still an interesting one though, because with Minesweeper and Vanguard you can completely screw over your opponent's plans for putting up any mines. So it's with those 2 rules, I think it's one of the most effective minesweepers that I've seen in the game yet. And with Vanguard and Speed 8, you do have one of those cruiser units that can make it across the board in those missions that require you to do so. So I still think this is a strong entry, even if your opponent isn't taking any mines along with it. Next up we have the larger platform for the Portuguese. I always find these hard. I haven't experimented with them all that much. If you have though, make sure that you write in the comments what you make of them, because yeah, I still have to experiment with them. Can't quite wrap my head around them. They're only armor 5 with 12 hull points, still clocking in at a hefty 160 points. You can stack them up to the sky high with different weapons, but that low toughness is still going to be a thing, so I haven't quite seen a reason to include them in my lists personally, but I might be completely wrong, and if I am, do please correct me in the comments below. The Picardy Littoral Monitor is the smallest ship that you can make for the French, which is only a single heavy gun battery in the front and then nothing else beside that. It does get maritime patrol to sort of help it hunt submarines slightly better, but I'll be honest, at 85 points, I can't really see why you wouldn't just go with the Loire, which gets the advantage of Vanguard and Minesweeper, along with an extra gun for just 5 points extra. This is one of those entries that I have a hard time justifying, if I'm honest. The Italians also have a fast and light cruiser, if you will. It's just called the Pilum Monitor. It's got hammer sweep, also comes with minesweeper, if you want to include that one in an Italian force, but it comes with a prow ram, but it isn't quite as fast as what the French can do. So it is a lot more durable though, because even though it's their lightest cruiser that you can find, they're still clocking in with Citadel 13, but it does lose a bit of hull points when it comes to its crippled value. Not the end of the world, I'll be honest, and yeah, definitely in my book a more solid entry than the Picardy that we've just seen. Next up we have the Providence Merchantman for the Sousa. It's not exactly a ship you would take for its offensive output, because there's virtually none of that, having only 2 gun batteries, which is nothing to write home about if you're clocking in at 62 points. This is the type of ship that you get purely for its utility, and it does have some good utility. Useful Fright is a card that, once per turn on their activation, for each model in this unit, the controlling player may look at the top card of their Victory and Valor deck and then either discard the card or return it to the top of your deck. So you're sort of shifting through some of the Victory and Valor cards with this unit, which can be a quite handy thing. Also, something that is not often talked about, if it comes to tankiness, this thing can take damage like most other circa 100 points cruisers found in other forces, while only clocking in at 62 points. So if you've got missions that just require you to be present in a certain board square, this doesn't do a bad job of it, because it is notoriously tough for the amount of points that you're investing in it. The Italians also get access to the Puggio Destroyer, and usually if you see a ship and there's Destroyer mentioned in its name, think of DPS unit, something that will do a large amount of damage but isn't necessarily the toughest thing around. And if you're considering that these things are 39 points and they can be quote-unquote one-shot by reaching Citadel 12, that's what I mean by it. I mean, they're not the hardest thing ever to take out at that point cost. And what do you get for the money? You get 2 gun batteries, which, with the new stats, definitely not that bad. Remember, that can kick out quite a lot of damage, and they can be fielded into units of 6, so that can stack up quite quickly. On top of that, they have the Pack Hunter rule, meaning if you have 3 or more models, you can use this rule. The unit gains an additional +1 action die for each model in the unit, contributing to a single attack or an assault action dice pool. All the models in the unit must contribute an action dice to the dice pool receiving this bonus. So in other words, you can just have everything piled together in one massive attack, and then you can get this one. In addition, it's a very interesting side firing weapon, because that light broadside can be used in support of this gun battery, so you can make one mega attack pool with these Puggio destroyers if you manage to catch something in the side arc. Although the bad side about this light broadside won't be able to stack with the 2 gun batteries in their ideal range. So, but yeah, this unit can definitely kick out a lot of damage should it so desire. Next up we have the Saratoga Littoral Cruiser, which is one for the Sousa, which is less armored than before, and this is the one that is able to launch assaults, like I've described, using the Virginia class to targets within 20 inch during the special operations phase. So if you want to create a unit that can deal quite a bit of damage, you can do so with this Saratoga Littoral Cruiser. The one downside to it though is that the fray value that it has for normal assaults isn't exactly the highest. These Terminators really have to do the heavy lifting. But yeah, who needs a regular assault if you've got a bunch of Terminators to do that job for you? So yeah, fun little entry at 110 11 points, you really are looking at something that wants to be fighting in closing and point blank range to get into that assault range. So keep that in the back of your head if you're selecting your force. This one just doesn't hang back and shoot at the enemy at all. At the start of the video I was talking about a unique bit of equipment found in the Alliance, which was the Rostrarum Naval Ballista, and this is the ship that carries it, the Scorpio artillery cruiser. You gotta remember, this is the weapon that if it damages the opponent, you can just turn the ship in whatever direction you want. So if you're asking why this thing has such a high points cost associated with it, that's the reason why. You can actually use them in bigger units, because they can have an additional 2 extra models in there, pretty much ensuring that that Rostratum Naval Ballista can do damage against all but the toughest of flagships, because you're almost always going to hit that armor 8 that is currently the highest in the game, and then you can just have some flagships turning around. It's a great way to mess up with your opponent's plans if you want to, and yeah, it's definitely something I can't wait to toy around with and see the rage on my opponent's face as I do that. The Sparta attack cruiser is the Italian equivalent of a full option pizza. It is the biggest cruiser you can build in that box that still has to come out, and just basically comes with all the guns on there. Clocks in at a hefty 130 points, but you do get quite a lot of firepower for that money. You get a front-facing prow ram should you get close with the enemy. It has a forward-facing gun battery in 270 degrees, along with a heavy gun battery. On top of that, it also has a rear-facing 270 degrees heavy gun battery. So it definitely is a side-firing profile to make the most out of all those weapons. That very much complements the heavy broadside that it now gets, giving you a serious amount of firepower, because you can technically stack these two together along with focused gunnery, because you just ignore the broadside quality on your broadsides and just add the dice to the main attack cruiser, and you can still use the focused gunnery rule when you do so. So yeah, expect to see a lot of shots being pumped out by this unit when it does this neat little trick. In addition, it's not exactly a slow heavy cruiser as well. At speed 7, along with hammer sweep, allowing you to boost that to speed 8, provided that you make no turns, makes this ship quite fast to cross the board, should you want to. I do have a video up with some tactica about using ships that have these aft-facing weapons though, and that is, the straight line is usually not the way you want to maneuver with that, so this hammer sweep, I wouldn't rely on it too much. Other than that, I really like what I'm seeing. Lots of firepower, nice juicy little 13 Citadel. Yeah, you can't go much wrong if you're buying into the Italians and building a Sparta, if you ask me. The Springfield Corvette is the smallest of the Sousa ships and can be found in the new box. It only clocks in at 25 points, although you're only getting the 2 hull points associated with this one. And it's not exactly armoured to the teeth, it only has the light gun battery in it as well. But it does have paddle wheels, so you can make a contra-rotation ship turn with them if you so desire. And they also get that Corvette duty that we saw with the scene on the Écuyère frigate, and I've discussed it at length there, so I refer to that one for this ship. The Sumter landing ship is a next Sousa entry, which is a bit more expensive than the Providence merchantman that we saw earlier, but it now comes with the Terminator Assault for a relatively cheap points cost at only 83 points, so that's definitely a step up compared to the Littoral, the Saratoga that we've seen earlier, and it comes with the landing vessel rule, allowing you to deploy ground units from this ship when they make contact with a landing point. This is a bit of future proofing. The land elements are not introduced yet, but if you want to be prepared for that, you could do worse than build a Sumter landing ship, because even without those landing rules, you're still getting a pretty decent ship for the money. Next up we have the Vasco battle platform. That's the one that comes with a single heavy gun battery in the center for 55 points. It's not exactly the toughest thing like we've discussed with all of these platforms, at armor 5 only and only still 6 hull points. But you can include a few extra weapons on top of these, and if you go about it smartly, you can pretty much make the most out of those coordinated support rules with these. The main danger is over-equipping your rather fragile platform to the point where it becomes a very easy destruction for your opponent, so I wouldn't go too overboard slapping additional guns on these. The Vulcan repair ship is a nifty little thing that the Italians have access to. It provides you with advanced repair facilities too, although at the cost of virtually all of the weapons platforms that it has. It is an attached unit that you can attach to a Italian flagship, however, and at only 75 points you do get an extra body on there that will repair anything closed by, so it's not the end of the world. It's just I would have liked to see a bit more firepower on there than it currently has. It really has become a big ORBAT, as you can see, because we've only just crossed into the skimming units after the surface units. And the first one is an entry that has not been released yet, which is the Alma Levant support cruiser, clocking in at 107 points. It's not exactly the most firepower that you're getting out of this one. It's only got a heavy rocket battery and a small rocket battery to support that one, but it does provide you with advanced repair facilities for your French units or your French Levant battle fleets as well, if you want to, and you can attach it to a French flagship if it's a skimming unit, so for instance a magenta, so you can follow it along and repair it whenever possible. And with the heavy escort rule, it also provides extra defense action dice pools to any friendly units within 5 inch, and now if you're attaching it to the flagship, that is most likely going to be the flagship as well. It is also a mine layer on top of that. Not exactly the cheapest one that you can get, but yeah, might be interesting to build one of those to attach to a flagship, but I would definitely not make a unit of 3 of them. Next up we have the main skimmer, which is the Chasseur Levant strike cruiser. It looks like it was changed to be a lower points cost compared to the previous version. However, some of its gun options did become more expensive. I wasn't too enamored with this entry last time I discussed it, because it now comes with a heavy rocket battery option, which I said was useless compared with the regular gun batteries. That has gotten better now though, although I still would not want to have the heavy rocket battery on there as the standard weapon. Reason why is you take rocket batteries to have a lot of dice at long range, and the gun batteries only go up to closing range, meaning 20 inch, and so you can't really use their support values with them even if you wanted to. So if it were up to me, I would almost always swap out that heavy rocket battery for this one, the Heat Lance. Now with that Heat Lance instead, you do get access to some frightening amount of devastating firepower using this one, and especially once we get to the next entry, which is the Dieppe Levant Solex cruiser. If you combine these two and you keep them close by, this one makes all nearby ships within 10 inch with a mass 2 or greater count as being equipped with a Solex generator. So all of a sudden, if you've got those Chasseur Levant with the lances and the lots of gun batteries to support them with those crippled dice values, you can get to some absolutely scary amount of firepower, because it counts as being equipped with a Solex generator. So I'm not entirely sure whether or not you can use the Valor effect to have it count as an extra Heat Lance as well, because you might be swimming in Valor cards with this setup as well, but that combination of the Dieppe and the Chasseur Levant is definitely one that I am going to build with my sets when they get here. The Alma was the defensive attached unit for a skimmer ship, whereas the Furieux Levant Grande Corvette is actually the more offensive one, clocking in at 135 points. You get a significant upgrade to the amount of firepower, but again it comes with that slightly unfortunate combination of a heavy rocket battery along with the gun batteries. So again, I would be swapping out that heavy rocket battery for the Heatlands for an additional plus 8 points, bringing it up to a hefty 142 points, which isn't cheap at all. However, why do I think it's a good option? It is an absolute beast when it comes to assaulting. You get Fray 12, you get the Corvette duty to protect the opposing ship, you also get a landing vessel for when that time comes when you can actually deploy ground units, and most importantly, you get the Legionnaire assault pods, allowing you to assault within 6 inch rather than 4 inch. And you ignore any counter assaults being made when you're making an assault, adding a bit to that defensive boost. You don't really have to worry. You can just send in the Legionnaires and just let them have at it. Furthermore, the assault by this model also gains the hazardous quality, so you can really disrupt the opposing ship and instantly send it into a full chaos and disarray using this ship. And if you send it out along with a flagship, I might even select this one as the main assaulter over the flagship, as you don't really have to worry about any counter punching. That being said, your opponent can only assault you if it is a skimmer or an aerial unit himself, so yeah, that really does help. This Furieux Levant Grand Corvette is super handy if you have a more up close and personal playstyle. There is also a flying merchantman, the Gascony Levant, well, skimming I should say, which comes with logistical support, giving you an extra victory and valor card. I think that will be big for the Alliance because they all have this for valor effect, so getting some extra cards means that you can probably get some extra mileage out of these cards through this effect as well. So that's a pretty good addition, and I wouldn't mind having a single Gascony in the force just to provide you with that one. You do suffer from a very much reduced amount of fire output because the output is just the same as the Alma, which is to say, not great. The Honneur Levant Destroyer is going to be a very fast-moving vessel. You mustn't forget it can go up to movement speed 14 if it's using its Levant Surge, and with 2 gun batteries and a picket broadside. Everything that I've said about the Pugio pretty much applies to this one as well, with the added advantage that this one is even faster and can easily come in from the sides during gameplay because of how the Levant battle fleet works. So it's going to be quite interesting because the Pugio does have the disadvantage of having to start on one side of the board and having to cross and not being guaranteed to have that first strike capability, which you are going to have mostly with the Honneur, so definitely also one that is on my radar as a near auto include in my my lists. The Marseille Levant bomb carrier is definitely also on my radar as one that I should experiment with because it is your Frelon bomber launcher. I've talked about these at length when I was discussing the Vauban, but you get a very hefty amount of them. I mean, 3 and 2 means that you're incredibly close to the bomber output of that Vauban, which, as a reminder, had a 4-2 value in this one. So yeah, you're nearly getting there for only 134 points. It's going to be a nice supplement, although with this one you do want to make sure that you've got some regular SRS tokens as well to make sure that your bombers are not intercepted that fast. In terms of output, it is not bad for a carrier as well, so you get that I was talking about the firepower of the Alma not being great. This is the same amount of output, but if you do that on a carrier, the conversation is completely different. I mean, that is a scary amount of firepower to be found on a carrier as well, along with 3-2 bombers. Yeah, that's a good entry. That's a really solid entry. The Voliere is the carrier that comes in with the regular one, and again, this is going to have to be used in tandem with the previous one, with the Marseille. But yeah, this one, when you just look at it in a vacuum, you would always take the Marseille. If it wasn't for the fact that these Frelon bombers are so easily intercepted and they need a pseudo meat shield of regular SRS to fly in front of them to soak some of that interception, you would almost always include the Marseille over the Voliere. But that's not the case here. You do have to use these guys just to make sure that the other ones make it through. I just wish they were a slightly or a small bit cheaper, mostly because they're also fairly fragile, and yeah, you're not really maxing out most of the speed if you're a carrier, because there's no point in trying to get that close to the enemy if your main idea is to launch SRS at 40 inch. So yeah, I just wish this one was a bit cheaper. The Alliance also has a healthy mix of submarines, albeit mostly Mass 1 submarines. The first one is one that we know already from the Levant sprues, which is the Épaular artillery submarine, which comes with a magnetic bombard along with the spotter rule. So that's another reason to make sure that you do take the occasional Voliere in your fleet. Because you do want to have the spotter rule to make the most out of this one. At 37 points, that is not a bad deal. The only downside to them, I think, is the fact that it maxes out at 4 of them. The magnetic bombard is an extreme range weapon with, at the best range, a 6-4 profile, which makes it comparable to torpedo salvos. But yeah, only having 4 of them is a bit of a hindrance to this unit. The Sahita Hunter submarine is the Italian version. That is the one that has the traditional torpedo salvos, clocking in at 40 points each. I do have to say, most of these comparable submarines in other factions are 35 points. I know that you can't really compare it. Long range firepower is in short supply for the Alliance, so I can see why there's a bit of a premium for these. And you do get Pack Hunter, but yeah, the plus 5 points per model does sting a little to include a lot of those. But again, if you go for an army that has lots of torpedoes and just spamming that, you're not really playing an Alliance list, are you? The Cyrene attack submarine is the one from the French, which is the alternate build version of the Épaular, which comes with a heat lancet mounted onto it. I wasn't that enamored with it at plus 40 points. I still think it is slightly expensive, and if I were to use it, I would still have it come in via the board edge with one of those Levant fleets, for instance, making the Vanguard rule that it baseline has a bit of a moot point. It's not fast enough to really just go in there and use those heat lancets to full effect without a little trick like coming in from the flanks. In terms of aerial units, there really is only one almost sneak peek, so I'm not going to go into it too much. This is more of a teaser in there. It is the Cordoba Aerogalleon, which, when you look at the artwork, is one of my personal highly anticipated ships. I do love the airships in this game so far. Flak Barrage 10 for something that is only 125 points seems borderline excessive though. So again, this is a preview one, but yeah, I can see a unit of 3 Aerogalleons just completely ruining your opponent's day if he wants to play with a lot of SRS in his list. It's not that fragile, it's actually quite durable for a dirigible construction. It gets cloud hunting as well if it wants to shoot at aerial targets. So yeah, it looks like a very strong entry, and with Flak Barrage 10, maybe a bit too strong. Well, we'll see. This is bound to change, I think. There's also one final thing I want to point out, which I'm incredibly happy with, and that is a unit identification guide. And Yay! A little preview of the Mars battleship can be found in here, so it is a bit of an Easter egg as well for the units having to come out, but also just very handy for people who are perhaps not quite as familiar with all of the different elements that you can buy, that there is a an entry that just says like, hey, this is what this model looks like. A lot of people still go for rule of cool. I mean, I make these guides to sort of help people with what the unit rules are like, but rule of cool is, I think, still one of the most important things, and if you look at this, at least you have an idea about whether or not you like the look of those units, and if you want to include them in your fleet, because I would 100% agree with you that adding things just because the rules are good doesn't always feel right. And it's nice to see that they include that in here as well. So there we go. Another massive ORBAT deep dive. I hope this one was useful to you. If it was, again, remember to hit the thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.